Thanks for tuning into tonight's edition of the Renshaw Report. Murray the Eye, reporting from the city too tough to die, New London. And I've been looking for interesting people to come on the show. And if you remember, Mike Becerra couldn't find anybody interesting after all the research he did. But I got somebody tonight that's very interesting. TJ Londregan is pursuing an entrepreneurial
aquaculture.
Well, but you're an entrepreneur.
Yes.
You're a pioneer.
Pioneer.
You're a farmer.
Yes.
And what he is trying to do is set up an aquaculture, did I say that right?
Yes.
Operation in the Niantic River and Niantic Bay. He wants to raise oysters, I believe is the product.
Oysters and bay scallops initially.
So if anybody reads the day paper, by the way, you haven't been in lately, so I'm assuming that things are going well. This has been an ongoing saga for Tim and his operation because he can't get approval to make this thing happen. It's been over 3 years now, and he still doesn't have a decision. We're going to find out about that and everything about Tim, TJ, in just a minute. But first, I do want to offer our condolences because one of the greatest guys in New London, Donnie Benvenuti, passed away earlier in the week. And I've known Donnie since I was 5 years old. He used to come up my uncle's gas station once a week, every week. No better man, no better person, and our condolences are in order for the Don Benvenuti family. So TJ, tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, Londregan is a name that's synonymous with many endeavors throughout the Connecticut area, especially New London. Where did you grow up, and what's your background?
Well, Murray, I'd first like to say that it's a great pleasure being with you tonight down at Atlantic Broadband. I really appreciate this opportunity. So the Londregan family, I would say, is entrepreneurial by heart in many ways. I initially grew up in the area. I was born in New London. I was raised in Waterford on Millstone Road. And then we moved to Old Lyme and now New London. Went to St. Bernard High School, graduated college from St. Michael's in Burlington, Vermont. And I spent a few years in the aquaculture industry and then ventured out on my own to start a farming operation.
What did you major in college?
So in college, St. Mike's is a small liberal arts college right outside of Burlington, and I majored in philosophy and a minor in religious studies. So not exactly tied to aquaculture, but the great thing about a liberal arts education, as I love to tell everyone, is it's reading, writing, and critical thinking. And with those three abilities, one can really expand their horizons and go after any opportunity, and that's why I really enjoy liberal arts.
So I can tell right off the bat that you're a great orator, just like your grandfather and your dad and your uncle, Tom Londregan.
Yes, I would like to think so myself.
Is that a natural ability, or is that something you learned?
Natural and learning. I mean, there's a lot of public speaking that I have to participate in, a lot of round room discussions, a lot of conversations with federal, state, and local agencies. So I talk a lot, even though I'd like to be farming more.
So Tim, what sparked your interest into getting into raising oysters? When did that happen, and how did it happen?
So, Murray, that's kind of a long story, but I'll give it to you. Back in high school, I actually was reading Popular Science, and there was an article about finfish farming, and I read it, and I really enjoyed it. So I went to college, and I was about to graduate, and either I was going to join my father in a real estate business or go to law school and join the Londregan Conway firm in New London. But I decided I wanted to do something different, and my grandfather on my mom's side, Dave Waddington, and Pat Waddington had a house in Niantic. And back when I was young, I spent a lot of time lobstering, clamming on the river, and I just loved it. I just absolutely loved it. And so I thought to myself, I wouldn't mind being a farmer. And my grandfather, Dave, passed away when I was still in high school, and I was really close with him. So I kind of wanted to reconnect with his roots, and he grew up on Fisher's Island, born there. So I said, well, why don't I go to Fisher's Island, find a job, try and figure out what I want to do with my life. And I did a little research, and there was a oyster farm out there, Fisher's Island Oyster Farm, one of the most prominent farms on the East Coast, one of the original 3.
How many years ago was that?
That was back in 2013. So I went to Fisher's Island, got a job with Steve and Sarah Malinowski out there, spent 3 years there, And I think it was the second day working on Fisher's Island where I told Steve, I'm not going to work for you for more than 3 years because I'm going to start my own farm. And about two and a half years later, started my own farm in Niantic, and that was 2016. So we've been in operation for about 2 full years, selling product for about a year and 3 months.
Now, prior to that, when you said prior to that, was that what you just described, where you were doing lobstering and shellfishing in the Niantic River? That was the only experience that you had up to that point?
On the water, yes, up until I was hired at Fisher's Island Oyster Farm.
So what's the process? You mentioned product. You're raising oysters. How does a little oyster, what's it look like, and how do you, where do you get it?
All right, so that's a great question. So what happened in 1967 at the Milford Laboratories in Connecticut, there's a great discovery. The scientists down there were working on rearing shellfish in a lab, in a nursery, and a hatchery, in other words. So where I get my product is actually from Fisher's Island, where there's a hatchery. And so you take a female and a male oyster, and you trick them into thinking it's summer. They spawn. You mix the egg and the sperm, and you create very tiny microscopic organisms that are actually swimming for about 3 weeks before they set and almost metamorphose into an oyster. Their organs change, they stop swimming, they settle, they start to grow a more permanent shell, and from there you grow them in a system during the winter. You feed them cultured algae, and they grow larger and larger, and you continuously move them through different systems until they're the proper size to plant in other gear for final grow out. So all of the product I have is hatchery. It's single set. It's not wild set. It's not collected from wild set either. Now the other thing is that I also run my own hatchery in conjunction with Fisher's Island Oyster Farm in Stonington. So I'm able to spawn my oysters as well as native Niantic Bay scallops in that hatchery, which gives us, the town and myself, a great benefit because in Connecticut, the Stonington hatchery is the only commercially available operational hatchery in the state of Connecticut. So that's how you get an oyster, at least in my business.
When you are separating the oysters, male and female, how do you tell?
So Murray, I kind of glossed over that point.
I didn't do well in biology, so.
Yeah, so I glossed over that point. You can't tell from the outside if an oyster is male or female. So what we do is we take about 20 individual specimens, we place them in a tank, and over about 3 to 4 weeks, we fluctuate the temperature until their gonads are ripe, their sex organs. And at that time, we stimulate them. And a female oyster, when she releases her eggs, it's in a puff. Her shell squeezes, and there's a puff of white, and it's eggs. And there's millions upon millions, tens of millions at a time. The males release their sperm in a constant way. So it's like a little flow coming out from the shell. So the way in which they release their gametes is how you tell the difference. Now, of course, you could take a sample and look under the microscope, but the way in which the gametes are released is how you tell.
What's this length of time it takes from the inception of the whatever they're doing to the eating the oyster?
Sure. So ideally, when we're doing type 2 intensive aquaculture, we like to say 18 months.
And they're ready to eat?
18 months from nothing to about 3 inches. However, in the wild, it takes about 3 to 5 years. So 18 months is ideal, but 2.5 years is more than acceptable in aquaculture.
Now, these little oysters, are they in nets, or how are they contained, and how do you contain them from swimming away?
Sure. So that's one of the benefits of type 2 aquaculture, as we call it. Type 2 means you use structures or gear, and there's a million different kinds. The way Niantic Bay Shellfish Farm currently operates in our bay lease in Niantic Bay is we use something called trays. And they're more or less lobster pots. They're fashioned in about the same way. They're 4 feet by 3 feet with 2 levels, which are 4 inches high, with feet that are about 7 inches. So they sit off the ground, and there's just layered trays, and you put the oysters on the inside. And obviously there's a top that keeps them contained.
What makes Niantic Bay and Niantic River so attractive to an operation like yours?
Sure. So if you look at the overall state of Connecticut, what you have to consider is, well, a lot of things, but primarily water quality. Because when you're going to harvest oysters, there's a lot of regulations that I have to follow by. And Niantic has some good water, which is a lot better than other areas in the Sound. Water classification systems. You know, it can go from prohibited to restricted relay to conditionally approved to seasonally conditionally approved or to approved waters. Currently, Niantic Bay and the Bureau of Aquaculture, which oversees my operation, is attempting to upgrade the water quality so that we can harvest more frequently if there's a rainstorm or a rain event. Because when there's a rain event, what happens, Murray, is it shuts down the water because of bacteria and contaminants that flow from the watershed into the water. But Niantic has very clean water in the way in which the water moves in the bay. The predominant currents promotes good shellfish depuration areas in the bay. So the product is safe to eat out there. Plus, in the river, you know, it's a shallow estuary, which means it warms up sooner in the summer, so you have an early start.
This is the river.
The river. You have an early start to the growing season. It cools down slower, so you have an extended season. Plus, it's very, very protected. You know, you have very little fetch, which is the amount of distance wind can travel unabated, which forms waves. And you know, it's a very, very short stretch. It's no more than 2 miles. Plus, the nutrient loading in the river is significant. You know, there's a lot of excess nitrogen that comes off of people's lawn or septic systems and comes in and creates these blooms of algae, which the oysters consume. So there's a lot of food, excess food, that the oysters can filter and consume.
So right now, with what you're producing without being involved with Niantic River, how many pounds of oysters do you produce a year?
So I don't operate off of pounds. I'm more of a boutique oyster business, and we sell by the piece. So by piece is how we normally talk in the industry. And about 250,000 pieces per year is what we sell.
And do people buy them by the piece?
Yes.
And who are your clients?
So I do sell to private individuals as well as distributors and local accounts. So I sell to Lillian's in Niantic, I sell to Tony D's in New London, I sell to Fresh Salt in Old Saybrook, Lives in Old Saybrook, I sell to the Essex, I sell to both casinos, I sell in Stonington at S&P, Oyster Club, Dog Watch. I mean, you know, I could keep on going, but there's a lot of local restaurants that really desire this boutique oyster, and I mean, it's really good.
Leave it to Tony D to come up with the best oyster in the world. The guy he's a magic guy. Now I know his secret out there. So Tim, what are the steps that you have taken, or one must take, to get your plan approved, part one? And part two, do you have competition?
So I'll actually switch those questions around and talk about competition. So currently...
You're an attorney.
Yeah, oh, hey, listen. So currently, in the state of Connecticut, there's 44 licensed harvesters. Now, that doesn't mean there's 44 producers. There's actually about 22 producers in the state of Connecticut, and only about 8 that produce a boutique oyster in the manner that I do. So the closest competitors, if you will, to me would be the Noank Co-op in Noank, Fisher's Island Oyster Farm on Fisher's Island, and then in Clinton. Other than that, the area is pretty much open because traditionally, historically, for the last few hundred years, a lot of the production has happened around New Haven. And Connecticut right now, you know, we used to produce 4 million bushels of oysters a year. A bushel's a 10-gallon basket. Right now we're doing like a fraction of that, 10% of that. So there's a huge market, and you can always sell your product. So I wouldn't necessarily say there's fierce competition. But you still need to produce a good product in order for people to buy it and fetch a good price.
So we're talking with TJ Londregan from the Niantic Bay Shellfish Farm, and he's telling us what's going on with his operation. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to call in, because this is very, very interesting. We're going to get to the best part in a little while. What's the biggest oyster you've ever produced? And is there like a champion oyster guy around, or a
Sure.
champion size oyster?
Sure, I'll answer that, and then if you want me to hit on the steps
Please.
which it takes.
Please.
So the largest oyster, most oysters, typically boutique farms, we don't like to hold on to them for more than 3 years because it's a business decision and they usually get too big. I've seen oysters about the size of my forearm, so they can be up to 9, 10, 11 inches.
Are there
So very, very
such a thing as
large.
ocean-going oysters?
Well, oysters are a saltwater species, an intertidal species. So yes, but typically, it's not like a sea scallop and a bay scallop. Oysters are intertidal, which usually restricts them to lower depth. Although you can grow oysters, people do grow them in up to 50 feet of water. So, yes. Now, as for the steps, there's a lot of steps. Typically, what one would first do is approach the local Shellfish Commission if the grounds are within local waters. If they're in state waters, then you go to the Bureau of Aquaculture. So you go to the local commission. Usually they have a shellfish management plan. Usually they have some sort of lease agreement set up, some sort of procedure, a permit, a license. It's different in every single town in Connecticut. There's no one way. So after you go through that, you get permission, then you move on to the state level, the Bureau of Aquaculture. You submit a form which is called a pre-screening form. That form then goes out to the Bureau of Aquaculture in the state. It goes out to DEP, boating safety. It goes out to fisheries. It goes out to DEP. It goes out to Army Corps, and then a few other smaller, less important agencies. After all that is done and they evaluate your document, they may require you or not require you to submit further documents. And those other documents can go from general permits to individual permits, and those are all different Army Corps documents that are required for the placement of gear in waterways. And from there, depending on how the permit process goes, it can take anywhere from 6 months to, I'm right now about at 27 months. So it's a process, and there's a lot of permitting involved. Once all those permits go through, then you have to get your harvesting license from the state.
Don't you already have that?
I do, but I'm pretending like we're starting from scratch. And then you also have to have your HACCP plan, which is a health and food safety policy. You have to have recall policies in place. You have to have mediation plans in place. And you have to be inspected by the FDA twice a year.
And do you have all that done?
Yes. I am fully operational. I'm on the interstate shellfish shippers list. So I can ship anywhere in the continental U.S. and in the U.S. territories. So I'm fully permitted to ship from my lease out in the bay.
Would your operation in the Niantic River be in the way of boating, or who would it inconvenience? Or
Sure. So one thing you have to consider is, where is the site placed? Now, currently, we are looking at a couple different options in the river. The initial area that was determined is no longer in the running per se. My permits are still out, and they're still going through the process. But right now we're looking at an area along 156 and then more north in the river up in Waterford, about mid-river. And you always have to balance competing uses in a river like this. And so is it going to impact someone at some point? Absolutely.
how so?
Okay, how so? So if we pick area 7, it is a sandbar, so at low tide it's impassable. But at high tide, it's quite possible that you couldn't take your sailboat through there. even if the sailboat had a low draft.
But wouldn't you want to stay in the channel?
Well, of course. You know, I try, and the Shellfish Commission try to pick areas where it's well outside of the channel, there's not natural product for recreational people, it's not a popular fishing area, and it's not high traffic. All those are considered, but no matter how much you try and mitigate other issues, there's always going to be something else coming up. So a lot of individuals claim to have issues, that there are issues, but in my estimation and many of the agencies' opinion, most issues are unfounded.
We've been reading about your endeavors in the day and reading from the comments that are sent into the day to comment on the articles. You have some support, and you have some non-supporting people. What is the biggest non-supporting question or complaint that why they do not want you to do this?
Sure.
It seems like there's some obstacles in your way.
Sure. So I would say the two largest complaints, I'm gonna not do one, I'm gonna do two now, Murray, is one, the use of public space for a private entity to make money. And then two, the aesthetics of the project, you know, ruin our sunsets. Would you like me to cover them in a little more depth, Murray?
Please.
So as for a private entity using a public waterway to make money, well, let us just ask a question. What do marinas do? They use public waterways to make money, a private individual, private business. And now something you have to understand, Murray, is that a lot of people believe that when they buy waterfront property and pay taxes for that waterfront property, it buys a right to the water, their riparian right. Well, that's not true. The only reason these property owners have a riparian right, which they do, and I think it's a great thing, is because it's public property. If the water was private property, riparian right would not exist.
Define riparian right.
So riparian right is the right for a waterfront owner to access the water that abuts their property. So, you know, if you want to build a dock, you can build a dock. You know, that's the riparian right.
And is there a length of riparian right? Does it go all the way out to the ocean?
No. So that is a very tricky question, Murray. So most docks do have certain restrictions on them, and when they're going for the permit process for docks, they are limited in certain ways. Usually it's to the depth of water that the dock reaches. However, you know, most docks in Niantic aren't over, or Waterford aren't over 100, 150 feet. However, some of the commercial docks are over 850 feet. So you have to ask yourself, well, you know, where's the cutting line? You know, and it's not exactly clear, but typically it's with depth.
850 feet out?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
And how much of an obstacle is that for you to overcome? How many of those people are not happy with the operation?
There's some businesses and some private individuals in town do not have some reservations about the business. You know, use of public land, like I said, being one. Two, it's about aesthetics. You know, I've had people say such things like the smell is going to push people away. The sight's going to push people away. The birds are going to steal the product and then defecate on our boats and on our docks and drop shells everywhere. Well, let me explain a couple things to you, Murray. If it smells because it's exposed at low tide for such a long time that not only whatever's growing on the cage dies, the product inside the cage would die too. So it wouldn't make sense for a business owner to let their product die, let alone if biofouling on the outside of the cage, like tunicates, for example, die. They don't smell when they die. They smell when they decay. And if they're out of the water long enough to die, how would they have even set on the cage? Now, I don't know if that was clear to you, but look at piling, you know, at a marina or something. If it's exposed at such a great length, nothing sets on it. And when it is exposed at a low tide, Does it smell? Well, no, it's not exposed long enough. And as for the birds, all of my stuff's in gear, and they're not going to be able to get it, and it doesn't make sense for me to be feeding wildlife. I wouldn't make money. Plus, Aryan species usually defecate on takeoff. So if they're eating on my lease, they'd be defecating on my lease, not wherever they flew to.
The Niantic River is controlled by the East Lyme and Waterford Shellfish Commission, the way I understand it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What is their general opinion of your plan?
Sure. So the Waterford East Lyme Shellfish Commission has control over the shellfish resources and the designated shellfishing areas within the river. They are very supportive, unanimously. Yes.
You've been approaching this thing for about 3 years now.
Yes.
Where are we on this day, January 11th? Is it the 11th day?
I think so.
Where are we January 11th, 2018?
January 11th, 2018, we have pending applications with the DEP and Army Corps of Engineers, but we are going back to WellsCo to reaffirm and re-notify the public.
Who's WellsCo now?
That's the Waterford East Lyme Shellfish Commission. They control the shellfish resources within the river. We're going back to them and kind of restarting the process again, if you will.
You're a very patient man for Londregan.
Thank you.
I would think the state would be a big proponent of this operation. Do you have support on a state level?
Well, Murray, the director of the Bureau of Aquaculture, Dave Carey, great guy, he is very supportive of small operations in local areas because right now Connecticut is lagging way behind every other New England state and some of the southern states. And Connecticut used to be the largest oyster producer almost in the country, okay? And right now, like I said, there's 44 licensed harvesters, only 22 producers. Rhode Island has over 100. Massachusetts has almost 200. Maine, they're almost at 100 as well. Connecticut, 22, okay? The other thing is this is also very, very well covered on the federal level as well. NOAA's director actually just put out a statement saying we want to encourage aquaculture growth. And there's a lot of reasons for that.
So why? I guess my question is, whose court is the ball in, and who's can make this decision, yay or nay, and so we can move on.
Right. So right now, what we're waiting for is for the town attorney of Waterford to come back to the Waterford East Lyme Shellfish Commission with a synopsis of his findings and an outline of how to proceed forward so that WellsCo doesn't get into any legal circles, if you will. So the town attorney, Rob Avina, is laying out a process, creating a couple new forms, and helping WellsCo develop a more direct process that's much more clear-cut and dry than what it was.
So you're more or less starting over?
More or less. At least at the town level.
What happens at the meetings that you go to?
Which meetings? I attend every Waterford Harbor Management meeting, every Waterford East Lyme Shellfish Commission meeting, and almost every East Lyme Harbor / Shellfish Commission meeting. So which one would you like?
Well, but tell me about all of them.
About all of them. All right. Well, the East Lyme Shellfish Harbor Management Commission is usually pretty cut and dry. I don't have any applications in front of them pending. The last application I had in the river was not in their jurisdiction because that commission has the East Lyme half of the river. I do lease 62 acres from them out in the bay, and there's been 0 incidents. I always pay on time, and they're very pleased with my work out there.
62 acres?
62, yes.
Wow.
Yes.
That's a big piece of the ocean.
It is, yes. But it's also very small when you consider the size and the number of acres that are actually available to lease. So then what happens at the Waterford Harbor Management Commission is usually they discuss issues of moorings, and then they typically discuss my previous applications. and they do not favor most of my applications, even though it is said that they do like aquaculture to a certain degree when it's in the right spot and at the right time and the right gear. However, currently that commission is putting forward a proposal to put into their harbor management plan that no aquaculture in Waterford waters can occur when the water depth is less than 5 feet above the gear at mean low water. It essentially would exclude all aquaculture from the Niantic River, and that was proposed after my applications were submitted, conveniently.
So they're trying to design language that would prevent anybody from going in there, any industry of your type.
For the majority, because one of the problems is the deep parts of the River Murray are either in the federal channel or they're in an area where there's a mooring field or it's a very loose mud sediment bottom, which is not conducive to aquaculture gear. You know, you can't grow or put gear in black mayonnaise. You know, that's that really like black, organic, dead mud. I mean, it just doesn't work, you know?
Years ago, many years ago, I used to do a lot of clamming and fishing in the Niantic River.
Yes.
With the greatest fishermen in the world, two of them, Vic Gasca and Nelson Cone. We had a lot of fun in the Niantic River. And brought my family, we got involved, and then we had more fun years ago than I can tell you. At that time, the Niantic-based scallop was renowned, world famous.
Yes.
And does that still flourish in the river?
Murray, no, it does not. So this year there is no scallop season. The 2 previous years we have had bay scallop seasons, and they've been moderate, lukewarm. All right, and those last 2 years were the first time in 5 years. I mean, the stock has completely dwindled. There's a lot of reasons for it. No one is absolutely sure why. But this is why, one of the reasons I want to be in Niantic. Because if I'm going to put all this time, blood, sweat, and even tears, believe it or not, into this project, I want to benefit the public. And as I've mentioned to you, I operate the only commercially available hatchery in Connecticut. So I'm able, and I have my permit right now, to go take native brood stock and produce it. And the deal that I have worked out with Wells Co. is an in-kind payment. And what that means is if I grow shellfish in the river, the stock that I produce, a percentage of it, I need to return back to the river. And what does that do? That gives recreational fishermen, like yourself, as you're saying, the opportunity to harvest more. Plus, it allows for more stock, more spawning. So first year of operation, I want to do about 2 million oysters in the river and maybe 500,000 scallops. What are those animals going to do in the summer? They're going to spawn. Where are those trillions of spat going to go? Spat's little tiny oysters and little tiny scallops. It's going to go somewhere, Murray, okay? And so that's one of the great aspects of having a joint enterprise between public and private. You know, some towns in Massachusetts and New York operate their own hatchery. The towns operate it at the tune of millions of dollars. We have that opportunity right now in Niantic. Now, there's no guarantees with Mother Nature, but it's a great step forward, the most aggressive step that we've ever taken in Niantic, and I think it could be huge.
Environmentally, has man figured out what to do and what not to do in a river like the Niantic River? Going back to the scallops years ago, and one time they claimed that it was the eelgrass that had choked out the scallops, and that was the reason they disappeared for such a long time. Have we figured out environmentally what to do and what not to do?
No. The biggest problem, now there's an individual, just as a side note, named Tim Weisel down at the Sound School in New Haven. And there's a big debate on whether or not eelgrass is actually good for scallops. And that's not something I think we really have time to get into. But the primary issue that we have in the river, this is undebatable, okay, is nutrient loading. And nutrient loading, as we discussed, is runoff from the watershed, which brings in too much excess nutrients into the river, which cause algae blooms, which are phytoplankton. And that clouds the water. And when that water becomes clouded, it doesn't allow for sunlight penetration. And without sunlight penetration, you don't have submerged aquatic vegetation growth. And without submerged aquatic vegetation growth, you don't have habitat for juvenile animals, and you don't have oxygen. The other problem with these algae blooms is because they consume so much oxygen themselves, they create anoxic and zones, dead zones, which you can have, fish kills. And so you really limit the amount of growth. So what you really need is you need clean water. We know that. And that really, unfortunately, comes from the land-based management practices, as well as sewers. Those two things are the best thing for a river system, along with the cultivation and preservation and restoration of the natural resources. Those three things are the most important, most important.
Some time ago in Noant, I believe the Indians tried to grow oysters.
Yes.
Are you familiar with that?
Yep.
Why can you succeed when they could not?
Sure. So the Native Americans, the Mohegans, invested many millions of dollars into aquaculture operations up and down the east coast of Connecticut, southeastern Connecticut.
Not only there.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, oh no, they're in New London, they're in Noank, they're in Stonington, they're even in Niantic, okay? Now all their equipment is gone in the water or wherever it ended up. A lot of it ended up in Cape May. So one of the main issues that the Mohegans had is they went too big too fast. And, aquaculture isn't just throw the stuff in the water, it grows and you become a millionaire. No. It's much more like terrestrial farming. You gotta fertilize the land. You gotta cultivate it. You gotta weed it. You've gotta handle it. Now, all that work that you do on terrestrial, you do in the water. You have to handle the product every single month. You got to make sure it's at the right density, growing at the right size. You chip off the growth edge. This was not being done with the Mohegans. At one of their sites, their attendance time was about 16 months, I've heard, or 4 months. In the growing season in the summer, if you're not handling that product every month, you're not going to get a good product, Murray. You're just not. And so they were overstretched, and then they had a death in one of the main partners, and after the death, it kind of fell apart, and then they sold. And the 3 individuals they sold to lasted about a year, and then they sold all the year.
Why did you pick oysters? Why not clams or
Sure.
bluefish?
Well, bluefish, I don't, right now, where finfish farming is, I don't want to be in doing that. Plus, the initial capital investment is substantial.
They are farming them?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah. Yeah. They're bass, bluefin, salmon. I mean, they're farming all kinds of fish. But oysters, the resurgence, the renaissance of the oyster is really up and coming. It's like the craft beer industry, right? There's connoisseurs everywhere that love it, okay? And it's one of the most raw, natural specimens that you can actually taste, the merior. In like wine, we say the terroir, the taste of the land. Well, this is the taste of the sea. And where you grow it, depending on the site, it tastes a little different. So that nuance is something that strikes, a chord in me. But also, you have to look at the economics. First of all, I'm very familiar with oysters, not so much clams, and familiar with scallops. But you also have to look at the returns. And right now, the oyster market is very, very hot. So you can get a good return. Whereas a clam is a third the price on the wholesale market.
You're making me hungry talking about these oysters. So I got to ask you, you must eat them.
I do.
And how do you prepare them?
So now, the traditional way is straight, chilled, with either lemon or lime. That's the old school way. You know, I like them a lot of different ways. I like them steamed open on the grill. I like them raw. I like them cooked. But if you really want to taste the essence, the Merior, as we were talking about, you want it raw, and you want it with a dash of lime.
What's Merior?
Merior is the essence of the oyster, the way it tastes. So, you know, if you're talking to a wine snob, they talk about the terroir. You know, they can point and say, this is from Burgundy, this is from Tuscany, you know, this is from Napa. Well, there's people with oysters that they can tell you this oyster is from Barnstable, Massachusetts.
Really?
Oh yeah, this is from the Damariscotta River, and they can even. I mean, it's people get really into it, and you can tell. Now, there's a very distinct line between Massachusetts north and south, and then a very distinct line when you get down more into the Virginia and southern oysters. But yeah, you can tell them apart from state and water body.
You described the Niantic River very well.
Thank you.
Is there another location that you would consider going to, or is there another location available for you?
Within the Niantic River?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. There's 6 other areas that are being considered right now, 2 with high priority.
So I want to get back to the Shellfish Commissions. Are the members of the Shellfish Commissions experts in the field?
So that's a great question, Murray. I get the comment a lot that I'm not an expert myself. Even though I've run a successful aquaculture business for 2 years, I run the only commercial hatchery in the state of Connecticut. And I've done plenty of reading, and I would be considered an expert in my own right. Define expert. You know, a lot of these people have been on the commission for decades. Some of them even have marine biology degrees. They're very knowledgeable, very well versed. I mean, for example, Don Landers is on one of the commissions. He runs the Millstone Environmental Laboratory. I mean, he is totally qualified. Stephen Dinsmore, qualified. You know, and there's multiple other people that do have marine degrees, and not only that, most of the chairs have gone to seminars yearly and taken programs from URI, and so they're pretty well versed. They do know what they're talking about.
Who on the state's level, and you said that it was the state that could make this call, yay or nay. Who is that person, and why has it taken 3 years to get to this point where you're really just starting all over again?
Sure.
You mentioned before, when we were talking before, you'd like to have your product in the sea, in the river, in the beds by April.
Yes.
That's impossible with what's going on.
Seemingly.
Unless someone with authority can make that call. Who and why won't they do this? How long are we going to massage this thing?
So the current holdup, as I said, is at the local level, and that is because the Shellfish Commission, you know, this is a venture that they really haven't done before.
Is it a political issue?
Yeah, to a certain degree, yes, Murray. But we're working around that. So the primary concern is making sure all the local level is taken care of. The state and the feds, they will go through with it. They are very encouraged. But they need the local approval first, and then they need to smooth out any dissent among local commissions or individuals.
And you have no idea when this can happen?
Not exactly.
You have high hopes?
High hopes. It will happen.
Tim, we have a call.
Great.
TJ, we have a call.
Great.
I called you Tim, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
DJ. Thank you for calling. You're live with TJ Londregan.
Hello?
Hello.
I couldn't hear you. Mr. Londregan, I don't know you, but I've been listening to you all night. I wish you an awful lot of luck. You seem like a very hard-working man, and I'm glad to see a young fella that gets ahead today in life. And I do wish you a lot of luck. I hope you have a good lawyer. Do you have a lawyer by the name of Londregan, by the way?
Currently, I thank you for the call. Currently, the Londregan law firm does not officially represent me, but I do have good lawyers. Yes, thank you.
But I do wish you a lot of luck, and I hope you succeed. You deserve it, and you're not hurting anybody in my eyes. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you for the call. We have one supporter out there. Who is representing you legally?
Legally, no one currently.
Okay, I think you're better off like that.
Yes, I even though lawyers are great, they do a good job. I believe the laws are clear cut the way they are. Some people disagree, and I believe that I think the town's going to do the right thing. I think the state's going to do the right thing. I think the federal agencies are going to do the right thing. And if they don't, then we'll go from there. But there's no point in muddying the water when it doesn't need to be.
Well, how visible will the operation be, and what are we going to see when you're out there farming?
Sure. Well, that all depends on the site. A lot of people ask me that question, and I say to them, well, it depends what gear I use. It depends where the site is. It depends what the tide is that day. It depends what the wind is. But more importantly, Murray, I can suggest what kind of gear I want to use, but the state and feds may tell me, no, you can't use that kind. We want you to use this kind. So my hands are tied a lot of the times in a lot of these decisions. But for argument's sake, typically, if I had an option, my oysters would not be exposed for more than 6 hours a day because I do want them to dry. I do want them to clamp their muscle, but at the same time, I want them to be feeding as much as possible so they grow as fast as possible.
How deep will they be?
Once again, it depends on the site. So, for example, if we were in Area 7, that site varies from at a significant low tide, a mean low water, it goes from 0 inches to about 2 feet. So you may have exposure for 6 hours a day at 12 inches or so, or you may have zero exposure. And you have to remember there's 2 tides a day, so you'd really only see 1 exposure tide, so 3 hours. And this whole aesthetics thing, it really interests me to a certain degree because in my mind, look at a lot of the other communities, okay? Look at Martha's Vineyard. Look at the Peconic Bay. Look at Fisher's Island. Look at Duxbury. Look at Wellfleet. Look at the Damariscotta. All these wealthy communities, much more so than our community, to be honest with you, have farms living in complete harmony, total exposure for many hours of the day. Cape Cod, North Truro. Okay? It's part of the community. It's part of our fishing heritage. A working waterfront, which is disappearing and not allowing my young generation to have what past generations have had. So to me, the site of this is not unsightly. I'd rather look at someone working at gear that's organized and kept clean than a marina or a mooring field.
You work from a boat?
I do. Yes.
What kind of boat is it?
It's a 1983 21-foot Romer privateer. A very sturdy down east boat.
How about noise, TJ? Will there be noise involved?
So no, not really. I mean, I do use a power wash to wash, my product. It's not nearly very audible. I use an inverter generator, and I run an E-Tech 2-stroke, which is very quiet. You're going to get more noise from a train going over the railroad bridge or at 156.
How many hours a day does a guy like you put in?
Well, you should ask my wife. It varies. When it's the heavy season, hatchery season, it's usually 12 to 16, sometimes 18 hours. But I try and keep it under 12 in the off season, as we should say.
TJ, are the oyster growers a tight-knit group? Do you guys trade ideas and help each other out? Yeah,
I would say so. It's really that on the water community, not just the oyster industry. It is very different from commercial lobstering. It's not cutthroat like up in Maine, let's say. But if one of my friends needs help in the Peconic, I'll take my boat over. If someone in Noank needs help, I'll go over and help Jim Marco or Steve Plant. If Steve Malinowski or Sarah on the island need help, I'll go and help them. It's, I've visited multiple farms. I just call up the individual. For example, there's a guy out, Dana, in North Truro. I called him up, said I was going up for a family vacation. I went to his farm that night, had a couple of beers. We will help each other no matter what happens.
Well, we're just about out of time.
Yes.
Is there anything else that you want to cover that we didn't?
I think we did a pretty good job tonight, to tell you the truth, Murray. I would like to just let everyone know that is listening, there is the next local meetings, the East Lyme Harbor and Shellfish Commission is Tuesday, January 16th at 7:30 in the East Lyme Town Hall. Probably not much will be happening there, but the real meeting of interest is the Wellsco meeting, which is the Waterford East Lyme Shellfish Commission meeting, which controls the shellfish in the river, which will be happening on January 18th at 7:30 at the East Lyme Town Hall. And definitely keep tuned. We'll be having probably a couple public meetings and possibly public hearings in the future. So if you want to stay engaged, I would really suggest that you look at my Facebook page. It's Niantic Bay Shellfish Farm, or go to my website, Niantic Bay Shellfish Farm. We just put out a new video about 2 days ago. It's excellent. Feel free to contact me via my email on my website or a phone call if you'd like more information. And if you support the endeavor, please contact your local officials. Dan Stewart, Waterford, Mark Nickerson, East Lyme.
How does Dan Stewart feel about it?
Dan Stewart is, his family is an agriculture family. He understands the benefit of agriculture and the need for a food supply. So he is supportive. He is hesitant on certain locations, but he is supportive of other locations.
Yeah. How about Mark Dickerson?
100% on board. Always has been. He loves the area out in the bay. He's got great ideas for the river. He understands the benefit to the town, the publicity it's going to give the town, the eccentric nature that it's going to bring to downtown. He loves having the local product, and praise that I can do something with the bay scallops, because that world-renowned really needs to come back to Niantic. It'd be incredible.
Hey, and in other parts of the country, are oysters popular, or are they just available here?
No, they're available anywhere where there's a coastline. They grow them in Baja. They grow them in Texas. So, it's a different oyster on the West Coast, but it's growing in popularity across the United States. Now, New England does have the best oyster, but there are other oysters out there.
Because we have the best water.